first became consecrated as a cemetery in 1890. And it was in 1893 the Har Hasateen Association bought the site, and they picked this beautiful spot overlooking the Mill Creek Valley. This location was far out in the country, so far from Philadelphia, and by tradition since Talmudic times, the Jews preferred to bury their dead at a distance from their communities. It may have been thought that it was healthier to inter the victims of disease far from the community. Also may have been that this was the only place they could buy land, whether it was all they could afford or the only places they were allowed to buy were far from their towns. When the people came here to the United States, one of the first things that many of them did, particularly the Jewish immigrants, they wanted to be sure that they had a proper burial. So they would join a burial association, or they would join a beneficial society called a Shevra Kadisha. It was for these beneficial societies that the Har Hasateen Corporation was established. A number of the beneficial societies, including the Pannonia Sick and Beneficial Society and the independent Shevra Kadisha, got together, formed a corporation that bought the land out here for them, and then each of the associations had different plots in the cemetery. And what would happen, they would have to take the train out of the city, then transfer the coffin to the horse-drawn carriage and come up this hill. Over time, what happened is other Jewish cemeteries were developed that were in areas that were a little easier to get to. And meanwhile, the beneficial societies, the Shevra Kadisha, began to decline. And as the immigrant Jews became more secure in the new land and were more wealthy, they became more interested in providing their family burial sites in the larger, newer Jewish cemeteries. Now today, although we had 20 acres originally, there's only 6.5 or 7 acres. They started to sell off the parcels around the cemetery. Some people have estimated that there were as many as 3,000 bodies buried here. Today we think there's about 1,200, but we still don't have an exact number. We do have the information on some of the names, but we don't have an exact number. After the last body was buried in 1945, the cemetery really became neglected, and by the 1950s it was already overgrown. The people who owned it had the idea, well, I shouldn't say they owned it, they claimed they owned it. There was some question about who really owned it. Did the burial societies own it? Did the people who bought the individual plots, did their families and their ancestors own it? But they filed an action with the court in Montgomery County to get a declaration that they owned the land, so they could then sell it to a developer who was going to dig up all the bodies here and build more homes here. And when people heard about this, including Beth David Synagogue, that's the parking lot that everyone parked in, and also some neighbors and Jewish residents, this group quickly got together, filed a suit, and said to stop them from digging up the bodies. And over time, they were able to get an order saying that the bodies wouldn't be dug up, and that they would give the title to a nonprofit to care for these graves to ensure that they wouldn't be disturbed, and also as a historical park and a memorial park. Would you like to meet a couple of the other spirits who are here in the graveyard? Come on. Oh, Rose! Oh, hello! I have some people here who would like to meet you.
Oi! You caught me in my schmata. I went to clean around my home. To meet me? What? What would they want with a woman like me?
Well, to start, they'd like to know where you lived before you came here to the United States.
It was in the pale of the Jewish settlement in the western part of the Russian Empire. I lived in a shtetl called Tarasha. We had a big Jewish community with a synagogue and a mikveh, a ritual bathhouse, a school, a cemetery, and a different Jewish association.
Why did you leave Tarasha?
Things got really bad when Tsar Alexander II was killed in 1881. Tsar Alexander III passed new anti-Jewish laws the next year. They limited where we could live, our schooling, and the jobs we could have. And then there were the pogroms. There were waves of attacks on the Jews that happened all over the Russian Empire. My husband was a tailor, and we finally saved enough for us to leave with our son and daughter in 1910. But he died before we left.
What was it like when you finally got to Philadelphia?
We thought the streets would be paved with gold. They were not paved with gold, but they were paved. We went to South Philadelphia, which is where many of the Jews went to live at the time. There were lots of Jews from all over, but mostly from Russia and Poland.
Did you need to work?
Did I need to work? Is there life without work? I knew how to sew, like all women in my day, and I knew more than most because my husband had been a tailor. There were lots of garment factories, and I went to work in one, where I learned to work a sewing machine.
Hard for your son as it was for you?
He was able to go to school, and when he worked, he was running around outside, meeting people and learning English. He had to handle money and do math. But even with all that work and school, he managed to play the game with the ball and the baskets.
Basketball? Way back then?
Oh, the Jewish boys at South Philadelphia Hebrew Association were great players. Beautiful to watch.
Did he become a tailor?
Oh no. He worked hard in school and got into Temple Dental School. He wanted to be a dentist. He made me so proud.
Were you able to see him become a dentist?
No. I was one of the more than 12,000 people in Philadelphia who died during the 1918 flu pandemic.
Sorry to hear you died so young.
I made a better life for my son, who would come with his wife and my grandchildren to visit my grave. They would leave a stone each time. But my son died and my grandchildren moved away. But now, I have you to visit. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if we can find another spirit.
My name is Louis Barrow, and I'm buried here in the cemetery. My grave is actually a little bit down the hill here. I was born in Minsk, Russia, in the Minsk, Russia area in 1860. And around 1882, they enacted the May laws. And the May laws were very tough edicts issued by the Tsar. The Tsar believed that the Jews, that Tsar Alexander II was assassinated, and many people in Russia believed that the Jews were responsible for this assassination. So a big series of pogroms came, and they forced all sorts of things that restrictions on life for my family in Russia. I felt that it was necessary to try to build a new life for my family in America. I brought my son over, Abraham, in 1900, along with his mother, Kayla, and I had 8 children. And Abraham then had 4 children. Abraham had, let's see, Harold, Lester, Willard, and Sydney. Yes, thank you.
And what did your children do when they got older in this country?
Yes, well, Abraham was a painter. He had a painting business and wallpaper type of business. And then his children, one child, Sydney, became a pediatrician. Willard was a professional artist, and then Harold and Lester were in the interior design business. And then actually Willard had a son, Larry, who's here today.
Where specifically did you live in the United States?
Yes, so I came over on a boat from Russia and came into Ellis Island, and there had been people that had settled here in my family in Philadelphia, so I moved to the Fairmont area, where I opened up my my bookbinding business. I died of typhoid, so typhoid is a disease that comes from poor water pollution, and there was a lot of water pollution at that time, and a lot of cases of typhoid that were going around. So I died very young at 41, sadly. And I was buried in this cemetery. I had prepared you paid 50 cents a month in order to be buried in the cemetery, and so I had paid that out every month, and then in order to I think the cemetery fund that I paid into, they would spend, I think, $3.50 in order to dig my grave.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering, how many souls do you think are buried here?
3,000.
None.
Oh,
There are no souls buried here.
that's
We don't bury souls. We bury bodies. But sometimes souls don't want to leave so quickly. And so some of us stay around, and we're always happy when we get some visitors. Because I've been talking to the same ghosts now for 100 and some years. We don't have that much to say to each other anymore. We don't have elaborate rituals to go with someone dying. They're pretty simple. When someone dies, the people from the Chevra Kadisha, from the Holy Society that I know our wonderful caretaker who keeps track of all those things told you all about, the various Chevra Kadisha that helped with burials here at our cemetery. And the person who died would be laid out, often on the floor. They would roll out a plain sheet, muslin sheet, on the floor. They would lay the person out, and the Chevra Kadisha would proceed to wash the dead person. And here at Har HaSeitim, those people were also put into a plain pine coffin and were brought to the cemetery on the train. And then by the horse-drawn carriage, and they would be brought to the edge of the cemetery. Horses were not allowed in the cemetery. They would be brought to the cemetery, and family or friends would carry the coffin to the place where someone would be buried. And so there was a small, short graveyard service where people would say something about the person who died. Shochen b'amramim amsei menucha nechona tachas kanfei hashchina b'mahalos kedoshim utarim kezohar harakia mazirim es nishmos kol eile shehizkarnu hayom livracha ana ba'al harachamim tastirem b'seiser knafecha le'olamim v'sitzror v'tziror hachayim et nishmoseihem v'yanuchu amash kivosam v'shalom v'nomar Amen.
God, full of mercy, who dwells above, give rest on the wings of the divine presence amongst the holy, pure, and glorious who shine like the sky. For the souls of those buried here in the Gladwyne Jewish Memorial Cemetery, for whom prayer was offered in the memory of their souls. Therefore, the Merciful One will protect their souls forever, and will merge their souls with eternal life. The everlasting is their heritage, and they shall rest peacefully at their lying place. And let us say,